First Contact and Pride. The Zanari warship Celestial Blade cut through Earth's atmosphere like a knife through silk, its crystalline hull refracting sunlight in mesmerizing patterns. Commander Vezara stood at the bridge, her silver-scaled skin gleaming under the ship's ambient lighting. Her crimson eyes narrowed as she studied the holographic display of Earth's major cities. "Primitives," she muttered, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of military victory. The Zanari had conquered 12 galaxies, their all-female warrior society proving superior to every civilization they'd encountered. Earth would be no different. "Shall we begin the standard intimidation protocol, Commander?" Lieutenant Nira asked, her battle armor humming with contained energy. At 7 feet tall, she was small for a Zanari, but her combat record was impeccable. "No," Vezara replied, a cruel smile playing across her lips. "Let's give them a proper demonstration of superiority. Target their largest military installation." The Celestial Blade positioned itself above Norfolk Naval Station, its shadow casting a mile-wide eclipse over the Virginia coastline. Panic erupted below as the ship's presence triggered every defense system on the eastern seaboard. Fighter jets scrambled from nearby bases, looking like insects compared to the massive alien vessel. In the chaos below, James Harrison watched the scene unfold from the base's Strategic Command Center. At 45, he'd seen enough combat to know when he was outgunned, but something about this display struck him as theatrical. 20 years in military intelligence and strategic planning had taught him to look beyond the obvious. "Sir, they're not responding to any communication attempts," a young lieutenant reported, his voice shaking. James studied the alien ship's positioning. Despite its overwhelming size and apparent threat, it had chosen a position that minimized potential civilian casualties. This wasn't an attack formation, it was a statement. "Stop transmitting," James ordered, his voice calm and measured. "They're not here to talk. They're here to prove something." As if confirming his analysis, a beam of purple energy shot from the ship, creating a perfect circle of devastation around an empty section of the base's aircraft runway. The precision was surgical, the message clear. They could have hit anything, but they chose not to. "Impressive light show," James muttered, earning surprised looks from the other officers. He grabbed a radio, broadcasting on all frequencies. "To the vessel above Norfolk Naval Station. If you wanted our attention, you could have just asked nicely." The bridge of the Celestial Blade fell silent as James's voice echoed through their communications system. Vezara's expression shifted from amusement to curiosity. Most species either attacked foolishly or surrendered immediately. This response was different. "Patch me through to that signal," she commanded. The ship's AI complied instantly. "You speak boldly for a member of such an inferior species." James' reply came quickly, his tone conversational rather than confrontational. "Inferior is a matter of perspective, isn't it? I see a ship capable of destroying us, choosing instead to make a point. That speaks of intelligence, not just power. Perhaps we could have a real conversation." Vezara found herself intrigued despite her prejudices. "You suggest diplomatic dialogue while we hold your world at our mercy." "I suggest that if you were truly here to destroy us, you wouldn't have wasted time with warning shots," James responded. "My name is James Harrison, Strategic Advisor to Earth's Combined Defense Forces. I'm unarmed and willing to meet in person, if you're interested in learning why humanity might surprise you." Lieutenant Nira stepped forward. "Commander, this is beneath us. We should simply." Vezara raised a hand, silencing her subordinate. In 12 galaxies, no one had ever responded to their arrival quite like this. Very well, James Harrison. You shall have your meeting, but know that any deception will result in your world's immediate destruction. The Zanari landing party materialized on the runway moments later, their armor gleaming in the midday sun. James walked out to meet them alone, despite the protests of his colleagues. He approached with measured steps, his posture relaxed but alert. Vezara studied the human before her. He was shorter than any Zanari warrior, yet he carried himself with an assurance that suggested neither fear nor foolish bravado. His grey hair and the lines on his face spoke of experience, while his eyes held an intelligence that made her usual sense of superiority waver slightly. Your species has an interesting approach to first contact, James said, stopping at a respectful distance. Though I suppose when you're used to being the strongest person in the room, subtlety becomes optional. You mock us? Naira stepped forward, her hand moving to her weapon. Not at all, James replied. I'm simply observing that true strength rarely needs to prove itself. The fact that you chose precision over destruction tells me you're not just warriors, you're strategists. That makes you far more interesting than simple conquerors. Vezara found herself suppressing a smile. This human was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, perhaps both. You speak of strength, yet your world's defenses are primitive, your weapons insignificant. Technology isn't everything, James countered. Humanity has survived and thrived against overwhelming odds throughout our history. We faced extinction-level events, fought wars that should have destroyed us, and yet here we stand. Not because we're the strongest or the most advanced, but because we never learned when to quit. The conviction in his voice gave Vezara pause. She had encountered countless species, but none had dared to speak to her as an equal. The human's words carried no trace of fear or submission, only a quiet confidence that she found oddly compelling. Prove it, she challenged, her crimson eyes locked onto his. Show me this strength you speak of. James smiled, a gesture that somehow managed to be both respectful and slightly challenging. With pleasure, Commander. Though I should warn you, humanity has a habit of exceeding expectations. As the sun set behind the massive alien vessel, casting long shadows across the naval base, neither human nor Zanari realized that this encounter would change both their civilizations forever. The game of power and pride was about to transform into something far more complex than either side had anticipated. The challenge. The Pentagon's largest conference room had been transformed into an impromptu diplomatic chamber. Military leaders from every major nation sat alongside scientists and strategists, their attention fixed on the holographic display projecting from Vezara's gauntlet. The image showed the Zanari's path of conquest across multiple galaxies, each point of light representing another civilization that had fallen before them. 12 galaxies, 317 species, 0 defeats, Vezara announced, her voice carrying a mix of pride and challenge. Each of these civilizations claimed to be different, special. Each fell before our might. James Harrison studied the display with analytical intensity, noting patterns that others might miss. Interesting that you chose to show us this, he said, rising from his chair. But I notice something peculiar about your conquests, Commander. Vezara's crimson eyes narrowed. Enlighten us, human. Every civilization you conquered was at roughly the same technological level, James observed, stepping closer to the hologram. Advanced enough for space travel, but young enough to still rely primarily on conventional warfare. You've never faced a species that had to evolve differently. Lieutenant Nira scoffed, her silver scales flickering in the dim light. Are you suggesting your primitive world could offer something new? I'm suggesting, James replied, his voice steady. That humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology, it's our adaptability. Our ability to turn disadvantages into advantages. Vezara moved through the hologram, dissolving the star map as she approached James. Then perhaps it's time for a practical demonstration. I propose a series of challenges, 3 tests, to prove humanity's worth. The room erupted in whispered conversations. James held Vezara's gaze, understanding the weight of what she was offering. This wasn't just a test. It was an opportunity to change everything. "Name your terms," he said. "First, a test of strategy," Vezara declared. "Your best tactical minds against ours in a simulated battle. Second, a test of innovation, solving a problem that has puzzled our engineers for centuries. Finally, combat. You and I, Harrison, with the weapons of your choosing." The room fell silent. General Rivera, the Joint Chiefs Chairman, stepped forward. "This is madness. We can't stake Earth's future on." "Accepted," James interrupted, never breaking eye contact with Vezara. The first challenge began the next day. The Zenari had created a massive virtual battlefield, a neutral scenario where neither side had a technological advantage. James led a team of Earth's finest strategists against Vezara's elite commanders. The simulation unfolded like a complex dance. The Zenari moved with precision and overwhelming force, their strategies refined by centuries of victory. But James's team did the unexpected. They retreated when they should have advanced, split their forces when convention demanded unity, and used the terrain in ways that defied traditional military doctrine. "Fascinating," Vezara murmured as she watched James turn another apparent defeat into an ambush. "They fight like water, floating around obstacles rather than through them." After 18 hours of virtual combat, the simulation ended in a stalemate, something the Zenari had never experienced before. The second challenge took place in the Celestial Blades engineering bay. The Zenari presented humanity with their greatest technological puzzle, a power source that had burned out centuries ago, which no civilization had managed to restart. James assembled a team of Earth's most brilliant minds, but not just scientists. He included artists, musicians, and even a child prodigy. The Zenari watched in confusion as this eclectic group approached the problem from angles they had never considered. "The solution isn't in the technology," explained Dr. Reena Patel, her hands moving across the ancient device. "It's in the harmony. The power source doesn't need restarting. It needs retuning, like an instrument." When the device hummed to life after 3 days of work, even Lieutenant Naylor couldn't hide her amazement. But it was the final challenge that would truly test both species' assumptions. The combat arena was set up in the Nevada desert, away from civilian populations. James arrived wearing standard military fatigues, carrying only a simple staff. "No energy weapons?" Vezara asked, her own blade humming with power. "Like I said," James replied, settling into a ready stance. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways." The duel that followed would be spoken about for generations on both worlds. Vezara's superior strength and speed were matched against James's experience and adaptability. Where she struck with overwhelming force, he redirected and countered. When she pressed her advantage, he turned her momentum against her. Hours passed, and still they fought. The sun set and rose again, neither warrior willing to concede. But something else was happening, something beyond the combat itself. Each exchange taught them something about the other's species. Each move revealed a new perspective. Finally, as the second sunrise painted the desert sky, James saw his opportunity. Instead of dodging Vezara's strike, he stepped into it, using her own movement to disarm her, while simultaneously dropping his staff. They stood there, both unarmed, both exhausted, both forever changed by what had transpired. "You could have won," Vizara said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Winning wasn't the point," James replied, offering his hand. "Understanding was." As Vizara clasped his hand, a gesture that would be captured and broadcast across two worlds, both leaders realized that they had achieved something far greater than victory. They had found mutual respect. But neither knew that this moment of triumph would soon be tested by a threat that would force both species to question everything they believed about strength, survival, and the true meaning of superiority. Hidden threats. The celebration of newfound understanding between humans and Zanari lasted precisely 3 days before the universe reminded both species that pride comes before a fall. The first warning came in the form of a destroyed Zanari outpost near the edge of their territory, something that hadn't happened in centuries. James stood on the bridge of the Celestial Blade, studying the footage of the attack alongside Vizara. The destruction was absolute, the outpost reduced to floating debris in the void of space. "No energy signatures we recognize," Vizara admitted, her usual confidence replaced by concerned focus. "Whatever did this, it's not like anything we've encountered before." "Look at the attack pattern," James pointed to the holographic replay. "It's not random destruction. There's intelligence behind it. They're testing your defenses, learning your weaknesses." Lieutenant Naira, who had gradually come to respect human insight, stepped forward. "Commander, we're receiving reports of similar attacks across 3 different sectors. Whatever this is, it's coordinated." The situation deteriorated rapidly over the next 48 hours. More Zanari outposts fell, each attack more precise than the last. But it was the message broadcast across all frequencies that changed everything. A transmission that chilled both human and Zanari blood. The holographic image that appeared showed a being unlike anything either species had encountered. Its form seemed to shift and flow, as if reality itself bent around it. When it spoke, its words translated simultaneously into all known languages. "We are the Nexus," the being announced. "We have watched and waited as the Zanari spread their empire of pride, as humans clawed their way toward the stars. Your conflicts amuse us, but your existence offends the natural order. Prepare yourselves for dissolution." The bridge fell silent as the transmission ended. James was the first to speak, his tactical mind already processing implications. "They've been watching us. Both of us. The timing of this isn't coincidental." Vizara nodded, her crimson eyes narrowed in thought. "They waited until our species found common ground." "Why?" "Because united, we're a threat," James realized. "Think about it. The Zanari have power, technology, centuries of military experience. Humanity has adaptability, innovation, unconventional thinking. Together we represent something new," Vizara finished. "Something unpredictable. The next attack came not at the edges of Zanari space, but at Earth itself. The Nexus forces appeared in high orbit, their ships seeming to phase in and out of reality. Earth's defenses, even augmented by Zanari technology, barely slowed them down. But this time, something was different. As the Nexus ships descended toward major population centers, they encountered a defense that combined Zanari power with human ingenuity. James and Vizara had spent the precious hours since the first transmission preparing. Now, James commanded as the enemy reached the stratosphere. Immediately, thousands of seemingly primitive satellites activated, creating a web of intersecting energy fields based on Dr. Patel's breakthrough with the ancient power source. The Nexus ships, expecting to phase through conventional defenses, found themselves trapped in normal space. Visara's fleet, positioned according to James's unconventional strategy, struck from multiple vectors simultaneously. Impossible. The Nexus commander's voice boomed across all frequencies. Your species are too primitive to understand phase technology. Understanding isn't always necessary for victory, James replied, a grim smile on his face. Sometimes you just need to know where to get. But their initial success was short-lived. The Nexus forces adapted quickly, their ships transforming in ways that defied physics. What had seemed like a decisive advantage turned into a grinding battle of attrition. Their learning, Visara observed, watching as another combined human-Zanari attack force was decimated. Every strategy we use becomes less effective. James studied the battlefield displays, his mind racing. Then we need to become unpredictable. Lieutenant Nira, remember how confused you were by our seemingly random tactics during the simulation? Nira's eyes widened in understanding. You want us to abandon centuries of military doctrine. I want us to combine it, James corrected. Zenari precision with human chaos, order, and entropy together. Visara considered this for a moment before nodding decisively. All forces, new protocol. Each Zenari ship will be paired with a human tactical advisor. Follow their suggestions, no matter how illogical they seem. What followed was unlike anything either species had experienced. Zenari warships performed maneuvers that violated every principle of their military training, while human forces applied alien technology in ways its creators had never imagined. The Nexus forces, designed to predict and counter conventional warfare, found themselves facing an enemy that defied prediction. A Zenari dreadnought would move to engage head-on, only to serve as a distraction for a swarm of modified Earth satellites. Human fighters would retreat in apparent panic, leading pursuers into precisely calculated energy webs. But even as they fought back, both James and Visara knew this was just the beginning. The Nexus wouldn't be defeated so easily, and their next move would test the newfound alliance between humans and Zenari to its very limits. As the initial battle for Earth drew to an uncertain close, James watched the casualty reports scroll across his screen. The price of resistance was high, but the alternative was extinction. He felt Visara's hand on his shoulder, its weight carrying understanding rather than the condescension she would have shown mere days ago. Your species continues to surprise me, James Harrison, she said quietly. Perhaps that's exactly what we need right now. The Nexus ships retreated to regroup, leaving Earth's atmosphere scared, but its people undefeated. But in the brief respite, both leaders knew they needed something more than tactics and technology. They needed a fundamental change in how both their species thought about warfare, survival, and each other. The real war was just beginning. Alliance forged in fire, deep within the reconfigured chambers of Ninor Aidid, transformed now into a joint human Zenari command center. James Harrison stood before a gathered council of both species. The mountain's massive screens displayed real-time data from across the solar system, each blinking light representing another Nexus incursion. They're not just attacking, James explained, gesturing to the pattern of enemy movements. They're searching for something. Visara moved to stand beside him, her silver scales reflecting the electronic glow of the displays. Our long-range sensors detect quantum disturbances at each attack site. The Nexus isn't simply destroying our outposts, they're analyzing them. Dr. Petal, still wearing her lab coat from another sleepless night of research, stepped forward. I think I know what they're looking for, she said, her voice carrying the weight of revelation. They're studying how our technologies interact, the way Zenari energy systems have begun adapting to human modifications. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Lieutenant Nera was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. They fear what we might become together. The past week had shown remarkable developments in human-Zanari cooperation. Earth's scientists, working alongside Zanari engineers, had begun creating hybrid technologies that shouldn't have been possible. The ancient power source they'd reactivated had become the foundation for innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. "Show them." James nodded to Dr. Patel, who activated a holographic display in the center of the room. The image showed a new type of ship, one that combined Zanari crystalline architecture with human-inspired organic design principles. "We're calling it the Synthesis," she explained. "It's not just a vessel, it's a statement of what we can achieve together." Vizara studied the design with intense interest. "The phase-shifting technology the Nexus uses. You've found a way to counter it permanently." "Better," Dr. Petal smiled. "We've found a way to adapt it. Human quantum theorists, working with Zanari energy specialists, discovered that our different approaches to physics actually complement each other. We're not just building a defense, we're evolving." But before the implications of this breakthrough could be fully discussed, alarms blared throughout the complex. The main screen shifted to show a massive Nexus fleet emerging from what appeared to be a tier in space itself. "They know," James said grimly. "They're not waiting for us to finish the synthesis." The Nexus attack was unlike anything they'd seen before. Their ships moved in impossible patterns, weapons firing from multiple points in spacetime simultaneously. Earth's combined defenses, even with Zanari support, began to buckle under the assault. "We need more time," Dr. Petal insisted, her hands flying over control panels. "The synthesis isn't ready for deployment." Vizara exchanged a look with James, centuries of military experience meeting decades of tactical innovation. They didn't need words to understand what had to be done. "Lieutenant Nera," Vizara commanded, "prepare the celestial blade for immediate launch. We're going to give them something new to think about." James turned to the human officers present. "Get our remaining fighter squadrons in the air, all of them, and implement Protocol Omega." Protocol Omega was something they'd developed but hoped never to use. A strategy so unconventional it bordered on insanity. It called for human pilots to manually synchronize their movements with Zanari vessels, creating interference patterns that could disrupt the Nexus's phase-shifting abilities. The space above Earth became a battlefield unlike any in human or Zanari history. Trained human pilots flew in formations that defied conventional physics, their movements guided by Zanari quantum calculations. The Celestial Blade, now modified with human-designed systems, led the charge. James and Vizara stood side by side on the bridge, directing a battle that would reshape both their civilization's understanding of warfare. Human intuition merged with Zanari precision as their forces moved as one, creating patterns of chaos and order that the Nexus struggled to predict. "They're adapting again," Nair reported, watching as the enemy ships began to shift their tactics. "Good," James replied, surprising everyone present. "Let them adapt. Every change they make tells us more about how they think." Vizara understood immediately. They're revealing their core programming, their fundamental assumptions about reality itself. The battle raged for hours, a dance of technology and tactics that pushed both species to their limits. The Nexus forces were individually superior in every measurable way, but they couldn't match the unpredictable synergy of human and Zanari cooperation. Just as their combined forces began to falter, Dr. Petal's voice came through the command channel. "The synthesis is ready, but there's a catch. We need both a human and a Zanari to pilot it. The neural interface requires both species' thought patterns to function. James and Vezara shared another look, this one longer and weighted with understanding. Without hesitation, both leaders moved toward the teleportation chamber. "Commander," Naira protested, "this is unprecedented. The risks are necessary." Vezara cut her off. Sometimes evolution requires a leap into the unknown. As they materialized aboard the synthesis, both leaders felt the ship's systems responding to their presence. The vessel hummed with power, its hybrid technology creating something entirely new, a perfect fusion of both their species' strengths. The war was far from over, but in that moment, as human and Zanari consciousness merged with their creation, both species understood that they had already achieved a victory greater than any military triumph. They had discovered that true strength lies not in domination, but in the willingness to evolve together. The synthesis rose from its cradle, its hull shifting between crystalline precision and organic fluidity, ready to show the nexus that the future belonged to those who could adapt, cooperate, and grow beyond their limitations. Evolution of pride. The synthesis hung in Earth's orbit like a dream made manifest, its crystalline organic hull reflecting starlight in ways that defied conventional physics. Within its neural interface chamber, James Harrison and Commander Vezara experienced consciousness on a level neither had imagined possible. Their minds merged not just with each other, but with the ship itself, a perfect union of human intuition and Zanari precision. "Their fleet is moving to surround us," James observed, his thoughts flowing seamlessly into the ship's tactical systems. The Nexus forces approached in their characteristic phase-shifted state, their vessels flickering between dimensions. "They're curious," Vezara added, her consciousness expanding through the ship's sensors. They'd never encountered anything like the synthesis before. The Nexus commander's transmission cut through all frequencies. "This abomination you have created cannot save you. Evolution demands the strong survive alone." "You still don't understand," James and Vezara responded in unison, their merged consciousness speaking through the ship's communications. "Strength isn't about standing alone. It's about growing together." The synthesis moved with impossible grace, its hybrid technologies allowing it to match the Nexus ship's phase-shifting abilities while adding something entirely new, unpredictability born from the merged consciousness of its pilots. Where the Nexus relied on mathematical precision, the synthesis flowed like water, its actions guided by both logic and intuition. Below, on Earth's surface, Dr. Patel and her combined human-Zanari team watched in awe as their creation performed beyond their wildest expectations. The ship's movements created patterns in spacetime itself, each maneuver demonstrating the true potential of their combined civilizations. Lieutenant Naira, commanding the remaining combined fleet, recognized the strategy forming in the synthesis's actions. "All vessels, support pattern Delta 9, she ordered, understanding now why human unpredictability combined with Zanari precision could change everything. The battle that followed would be studied by both civilizations for generations to come. The synthesis led a dance of destruction and creation, its actions forcing the Nexus to adapt in ways that exposed their fundamental weaknesses. Every time they shifted phase to avoid an attack, the hybrid vessel was already there, its human Zanari consciousness anticipating moves that should have been impossible to predict. But the true revelation came when the Nexus launched their ultimate weapon, a reality warping beam designed to unravel the very fabric of space around the synthesis. Instead of trying to avoid it, James and Vezara guided their ship directly into the energy stream. Trust, James thought, his consciousness intertwined with Vezara's. Evolution, she responded, Their combined will directing the ship's hybrid systems to do something unprecedented. The synthesis began to absorb the reality-warping energy, its human-designed organic components adapting, while its Zanari crystalline structure channeled and focused the power. The ship's hull shifted through colors that had no names in any language, its form representing something entirely new in the universe. Impossible, the Nexus commander transmitted, genuine emotion coloring its artificial voice for the first time. Your species are too primitive to comprehend. We don't need to comprehend, James and Vizara responded. We only need to grow. The synthesis released the absorbed energy in a wave that rippled through space-time itself. The Nexus ships, trapped in their own phase-shifted state, found their very existence being rewritten. Their rigid programming, designed to enforce what they saw as natural law, couldn't adapt to the organic chaos of the hybrid vessel's attack. One by one, the Nexus ships began to fail, their phase-shifting technology turning against them as the synthesis's energy wave forced them to confront a fundamental truth. Evolution wasn't about superiority, but about adaptation and cooperation. As the last Nexus vessel dissolved into quantum static, James and Vizara guided the synthesis back toward Earth. Their consciousness remained merged, both understanding that their victory represented something far greater than military triumph. In the days that followed, both civilizations began to truly understand what they had achieved. The synthesis wasn't just a weapon or a ship, it was a blueprint for their future. Human scientists and Zanari engineers worked together to understand and replicate the breakthroughs they had achieved, while their leaders began the complex task of merging their societies. 1 month after the battle, James and Vizara stood together on the observation deck of the new Joint Species Council station. Below them, Earth glowed like a jewel, while Zanari ships moved in harmony with human vessels, their designs already beginning to show the influence of their hybrid future. We were both so proud, Vizara mused, her voice carrying none of its former condescension. The Zanari with our power, humans with your resilience. We never imagined that true strength would come from letting go of that pride. James nodded, watching as the first new generation of hybrid ships began their test flights. Pride isn't always about being superior. Sometimes it's about being wise enough to learn from each other. The Nexus thought they were enforcing natural law, Vizara added, but they never understood that nature's greatest law is adaptation through cooperation. As they stood there, watching their civilizations take their first steps into an unprecedented future, both leaders understood that their greatest victory wasn't defeating the Nexus. It was proving that evolution's true path wasn't about the survival of the strongest, but the triumph of those willing to grow beyond their limitations. The synthesis hung in orbit above them, its hybrid form a testament to what they had achieved and a promise of what was to come. It was no longer just a ship or a weapon, but a symbol of a fundamental truth. The future belonged not to those who stood alone in their pride, but to those who had the courage to reach across the void and grow together. End.